So, I have a development economics background and also a statistics background as well. Started off as an agriculture commodities trader, and that's where I started to see the power of using technologies like remote sensing to monitor, at the time, agriculture and predict crop yields. But equally at the same time, obviously I was looking at soybeans in Brazil, palm oil in Malaysia, Indonesia. On the flip side, you could see the impact, right? You could see the soybeans moving from south of Brazil to, expanding acreage in the Cerrado and in the Amazon region as well. So I was acutely aware that, this was having huge impacts. So eventually I moved into using remote sensing data to really help smallholder farmers in agriculture, and that's something we do via our parent company, Manta Labs, helping with access to credits, access to insurance. But also, we saw that carbon could be a fantastic vehicle for allowing smallholders and farmers generally globally to have access to capital, which could allow them to actually escape the poverty trap, invest in their operations, not have to deforest, and the like. So hence, I guess that's where our paths, started to intertwine. And why don't you give us a feel for, Rabobank, which is the leading agri-lender in the world. Yeah. What kind of activities, what inspired you guys to get into the whole carbon space?
Yeah, I think, so again, that started with a kind of a personal story. The ex-CEO was at Davos, and he was personally challenged by, amongst others, the CEO of Microsoft, who said, well, you're one of the largest funders in the world of the food and ag space. And as we all know, the food and ag industry emits between 25 and 35% of global emissions. So you've been funding the problem. What are you doing about funding the solution? And that led to the formation of the Carbon Bank, but also to Project Acorn. And the Carbon Bank is, so we fund really large rural businesses outside of the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we finance almost all farmers, but outside it's the large rural businesses. And so they are actually access to potential carbon sinks in the soil, in the forest that they can do. We also bank all the food and ag corporates. So there's the off-takers, so that's a natural fit. But on top of that, I think, if you really think about it, all that lending is underwritten by land. Right. And in a world with depleting organic matter in the soil health declining, rising input costs, and climate change itself and the resilience, there is a risk in that the land will devalue. So there's also a long-term benefit of investing in this switch to regenerative. And we found that the carbon space can be a catalyst to do that.
I think that's a very interesting point, Kim, in terms of the risk for lenders such as yourselves, given the changing climates. Yeah. And I think that's something maybe we'll come back to a bit later on in our conversation. But just, it's tough to overstate agriculture's impact here, right? And when it comes to carbon, people often think about forestry, but here, when we think of tropical deforestation, at least 90% of it is caused in some way by food and agriculture, leading cause of biodiversity loss as well. And also in many countries, 90% of fresh water is used for agriculture. So hugely, has a huge impact on the climate and obviously everything from a carbon and biodiversity perspective as well. So I think we started our journey looking at soil carbon, right? Can you just take us a bit through that journey as well? I thought it was fascinating, having for many years looked at the main production belts in the US and Brazil. So take us on the soil carbon journey that Rabo went on.
Well, I think the Rabo Carbon Bank was actually formed around this idea. So how can we help our clients, who are farmers, access carbon markets, and specifically soil carbon and soil carbon sequestration? That's where their business naturally lies, right? So what does a farmer do if not managing the soil? So if you do that in a better way. We looked at different markets, of course, in the Netherlands, the US. But we quickly realized that in order to really get ready to scale, we needed MRV that was more cost effective than the current methods were. I think there's a lot of issues around soil sampling being extremely costly, as we all know, specifically at the accuracy levels that are demanded by the standards, and I think it's good that they demand this. And then process-based modeling, biochemical modeling, also has problems because of the data heaviness of it. And data is something that is really hard for farmers. They're not in the data business, right? They're actually in the producing commodities business.
Of course.
So in that, we started piloting, but we also did a proof of concept, amongst other with you. We selected 12 promising MRV players, both remote sensing and machine learning companies like yourselves, but also physical sensors and other lab-based methods. And what we did is we selected 2 farms of our clients, and we sampled, well, the hell out of it, actually.
Yeah.
Just sampled the fields to death. And then compared your results.
You had an acre-by-acre sampling campaign.
Yeah.
By the way, I didn't even realize there were 12 soil carbon MRV companies out there until you guys told me that that was our
more.
competition. Okay, fine.
There's more.
Okay.
This was a short list.
Right.
Yeah, so I think it also shows that the attention given to that market was really rising. I think, and that made us pretty happy, but it was also, how good are they? Everybody says they're the best.
Right.
But so we assessed the accuracy and precision of these companies against what we deemed the truth. I mean, we can still debate
ground measurements, let's call it.
Ground measurements. Yeah. And very honestly, I was extremely positively surprised by the results. You and one other company came out on top, of course, but I think your average error was only 8% as compared to what we'd measured, and it was way better than expected.
Right.
And that for us opened the door to actually start thinking about how can you deploy this at scale, because that data on soil carbon stocks changes, will underpin anything, whether it's carbon credits or other methods that we might develop maybe on lending, etc. So that was a really interesting journey to go on. But unfortunately, that's only part of it. Just having proof in a very small experiment doesn't mean it's applicable across the board. And I think,
and obviously there are other challenges as well with scaling soil carbon. But just to unpack a bit, because obviously some people here might think, oh wow, how can you get such accuracy? What's the approach? And I guess on a high level, I would say that we've been able to combine spectral data, publicly available soil sample data, and also climate data as well, and to produce models which can be deployed to make soil organic carbon maps globally as well. And also, I think that's where we kind of really lent on the expertise of our team, which is not just in remote sensing, but also in soil science and the physics of soil. So that's where we're able to produce what we call soil inherent optical properties, which are unaffected by things like soil moisture, the weather, and these kind of things, which could obviously impact on how you view the soil from remote sensing data. So that was great validation for us, obviously, that we could deploy a model trained in one place elsewhere, and also to get additional level of accuracy if we do have any data as well that could be used to calibrate in particular geographies. But so we got through that piece in terms of the MRV and understanding the tech and how it could be deployed and the level of accuracy and precision, like you say. But soil organic carbon has had its own difficulties from other respects. So Rabo, you are probably more well-positioned than most in terms of understanding the complexities and difficulties. Can you just unpack that a bit for us?
Well, I think that, as we've heard very many times already these 2 days, it's incredibly complex. And I think there's so many barriers to actually getting this to scale. And we've learned the hard way by doing it. I think, first of all, Rabobank finances mostly front runners. So many of our clients actually already employ at least a degree of regenerative practices. In Brazil, most, if not all of our clients are actually very far advanced in their journey. So then additionality comes into play.
Because these are the pioneers. And
these are the pioneers.
In traditional carbon markets, when it comes to additionality,
Yeah, so it's punishing the pioneers is one of the things, one of the aspects that's a barrier. But I think a mindset in the US, there's everything's pretty politicized. Also, the topic of sustainability. So we really needed to learn the language,
Right.
de-link it from sustainability, and actually link it to profitability. And that's well, it's semantics, maybe, but it really is something that you need to focus on, not just with our clients, but also with our own people and teams. That's one. Permanence is a major issue. Remains the cost effectiveness of measurement is still the carbon credits that we want to sell need to be very high integrity, so they need to adhere at least to the standards. But that means we need to work with the eligible measurement technologies.
Right.
So there's been a lot of barriers, but those lessons we can bring forward into development of new products.
And I think, similar to us, you have had a very interesting experience in Brazil,
Yeah.
right? We've worked on ARR projects in Brazil. There's a new exciting methodology coming out soon. So we're deploying that on projects in Para State in particular. Kim, you're also very active there. What kind of opportunities excite you in Brazil in particular, with mentioning?
If I explain at home what I'm doing at Rabo, and I talk about Brazil, everybody, the first thing, and I think we've heard it today as well, is the Amazon, right, and deforestation. And of course, it's a huge problem, and agriculture is a major driver. And we finance very large rural clients. So if we want to...
I think you gave me a crazy stat in terms of the production that is financed
I think
by Rabo in Brazil.
I will have to check, but it's around 20% of the harvest of all major commodities is
Right.
financed by Rabobank, which is large.
Yeah.
So what we do there, and our clients are of such size that we actually need to come with a suite of products or a quiver. So we're looking at ARR on idle land. Many farmers own that. Looking at restoration of degraded pasture and degraded land using integrated crop livestock, which is really about soil carbon and soil carbon sequestration, but also increasing productivity and thereby land value. And of course, avoided deforestation. But we really focus on farmers that have excess forest or surplus forest above their legal reserve. So it's privately owned land. It's only about planned deforestation because we feel that our clients actually have control, making the risk a lot lower of permanence and additionality, and offering us a way to actually incentivize them and provide a carrot to do the behavior that we all want, because it's really easy to say you should not deforest.
But let's just rewind a bit, because you just said avoided planned deforestation,
Yeah.
right? And I think basically all the conversation in this conference as far has been about, unplanned deforestation. So can you just explain that a bit for the audience?
Well, Brazil has one of the strictest forest codes in the world. I was surprised to learn that, by the way, because that's not what you imagine when you think about it, but it has a very strict forest code, and it mandates private landowners to have a certain percentage of their land as legal reserve, depending on where you are. If you're in Mato Grosso, it's 20%, in Tocantins it's 35%, and in the Amazon it's 80%. But many farmers own more land, own more forest than they're legally mandated to. And they actually have the right, legally, to deforest that, open it, and make it productive. And that's how agriculture has historically developed. But there's never been a way to monetize that forest instead of cutting it. And that's where, so there's many have already the licenses in place to cut. But we're trying to provide them with an incentive, a long-term 30-year incentive, not to cut it. And I think if there's a way that the carbon market should work and incentivize the behavior that we want to see, that's it. So it's really about planned. They have control over the land. They own it, so that makes it a single actor, which is very different from public lands, of course. So, and also they're our clients, so we also have a scope of influence, at least. I personally believe that is a very high integrity approach. I'm very curious what the audience thinks, so please ask questions about that later, but I'm pretty confident that it's a good thing next to the sticks we have in policies. So, yeah.
Very interesting. And I think, so with that in mind, let's come back to what we had briefly touched on earlier in terms of how this really works in the overall thinking of Rabobank from a risk and strategy perspective, right?
Yeah. Well, I said we had quite some lessons from our carbon market journey, and one of the major lessons is they're not a silver bullet, right? Carbon credits in agriculture can provide a real impact or can create real impact, but they're not the silver bullet due to all the reasons we already stated. So we're currently developing more products within the carbon bank in the strategy. So including carbon de-risk lending, for instance, because if you think about it, improving soil fertility, improving resilience in your system, lowering input costs, lowering the reliance on inputs, actually just lowers your risk profile. And what do banks do if not de-risking and lending against that? So we're really looking at how we can use carbon and organic matter in the soil to create new financial products that actually reward the farmers and ourselves in another way by de-risking that. So that's one of the things we're working on. The other is investing directly in degraded land restoration for long-term land value. These are all new developments that also have been informed by the carbon credit journey. But then again, having the carbon market standards for measurement, we will need that data anyway. So it does already help us on that journey.
No, I think that's, kind of the connected thinking that is quite, inspirational in terms of being able to understand that, there is a risk profile associated with a company such as yourself who is very connected to the land, right? And agriculture, which is both obviously a potential source of mitigation, but also has a lot of risk involved in terms of, as climate change does take hold. So I think that's a very interesting perspective. I think, before we go into the questions, and this is a bit off-piece now, Kim, but I can't have a conversation on agriculture, to be honest, without talking about rice, right? And some in the audience may, see me as a obsessive on rice. I do consume a decent quantity, but it's worth mentioning this is 13% of methane emissions globally, which could be attributed to rice production. And as with general agriculture, as we know, we have to feed 10 billion odd people by 2050. So when we think of the planetary boundary conversation, which organizations like Rabobank and others do discuss, we are having to balance feeding the population. Rice feeds, I think, 2.5 billion people, and globally, and in the most quickly growing populations in the world. And then also we have to look at the planet and biodiversity and all these other outcomes at the same time. So we do have a challenge. Yeah. I think the interesting thing is from a technology perspective, we do have the tools now to actually monitor things like flooding patterns in the paddies. And these are some of the innovations which we should see going forward. And at Geotree, we're very happy to be at the forefront of that. Is there anything you want to say about rice, Kim? I didn't tell you anything about this beforehand. No? I've said enough.
I'm a fan of rice. But
you're a fan of rice. Yes. Okay, yeah.
But actually, we don't work that much with rice farmers from the carbon bank perspective. So, but if we could have a look at it,
I recommend.
Nice.
So I think we've gone on a nice journey in our Fireside chat, and started in the US, gone to Brazil. Any kind of final takeaways you want to share with the audience here and at home?
Well, thanks, Jon. Actually, I've been really interested in the topic of biodiversity credits as well. That was mentioned this morning. It's something, of course, everybody's looking at, but I think in terms of what we also heard in terms of MRV, we're definitely still behind on carbon, maybe a decade, I heard yesterday. And I'm really interested if you're doing work on that and others are here. And on the topic of MRV, I think we have a shared goal to include these new technologies in the accepted certification standards. Because if we want to get it to scale, we need to be able to measure effectively and to have accountability and trust that those measurements are correct. So I think it's a shared goal that we have. We're also very happy to share our knowledge on the proof of concepts that we did together, but I really urge people here to join forces and get there, because otherwise it's never going to fly, and we desperately need that.
Yep, biodiversity is a very exciting area for us as well. You know, we don't want to have the carbon tunnel vision and ignore all the other variables that are affected, right? So, you know, when it comes to remote sensing, people typically think of, you know, counting tree species or something like that. But, you know, we do deploy other methods as well, looking at the spectral reflectance data as a proxy for biodiversity, especially as we get into hyperspectral satellite data as well. So I think there's a lot of exciting ways with new ground measurement data as well, which we compare with remote sensing, to have a scalable metric and measure biodiversity. So that's hopefully the next frontier as well. Anyway, so I think, you know, with that, this is coming to the end of our fireside chat without the fire. But yeah, I don't know if you want to open the floor to questions.
Thanks, Jon. Question over there.
I've got this one.
Thank you. Agnieszka from Carbon Markets at Equino. Thanks for the great intro, Kim. I had a quick question to you.
Yes.
Because I noted you mentioned ARR, restoration of degraded pasture land, even forest protection. You did not mention anything about row crops. Could you elaborate why?
Many of our farmers actually grow row crops. So it's soy, corn, also cotton is a major commodity of our clients in Brazil. But if we look at that, most of our clients, so we finance a very limited number of clients in Brazil, but they collectively own a large amount of land. But they are very far advanced when it comes to no-till farming, cover cropping, organic inputs, etc. So from an additionality perspective, we're looking at helping them restore degraded land that they often also own, because they're very often mixed companies. And if you think about it, why do people go into the forest? And why is land cleared? Because you want to grow your business. But if you can go left into the forest, which is on the map where it is, but if you can go right towards the degraded pastures and restore them and make them productive again, and that is integrated crop, and so there's cropping in there as well, you actually reduce the pressure on the existing forest, and that reinforces each other. So we do work with row crops, but our clients have usually already employed the low-hanging fruit methods, which is why we're really looking at restoration. Also, additionality-wise, doing something on degraded land, almost by definition, I think, is additional, because you do something new. You really change management practices, which is when we look at how regenerative is sometimes seen in the carbon market. Yeah, just do no-till and cover crop. Is that already regenerative? It's not really changing the system completely. So that's why we focus on that.
And just to be clear as well, the project we did in the US was on row crops.
Yeah, that was on row crops.
That was with soybeans.
Sorry, yeah, I should have said that. Thanks. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi guys.
Hi.
Great fireside chat without the fire, as you say. Rosshampton, this representing Australian Forestry at this stage, because I have a couple of hats. But I wanted to ask you both about insetting as one of your strategies. So I don't think we've talked about it much, really, but a good case study. And I also have a question about measuring our carbon inside a big farm. So in Australia, one of our case study farms that the forest industry and the agriculture industry both took to COP27 was a very large sheep farm with, it's called Jigsaw Farms, if anyone wants to look it up, a very large sheep farmer who decided for his own internal carbon neutrality to plant 20% of the farm for trees. And he did half of that he did for bio plantings, and he's got a whole lot more bird life. But importantly for our timber production, he also did half of it for timber production. And he became carbon neutral. But the interesting thing for us was that he's increased his sheep production by 20%. In doing so, because he gets some benefits like the lambs can get amongst the trees when it's really cold and that sort of thing. But the really interesting thing I thought from a carbon perspective, which is what we're all here for, was that he has to harvest and replant quickly now. He's realised, he did some measurements, and perhaps Geotree could help our farmers scale in this regard. He did some measurements and realised that it was plateauing, and that the way to get the farm, as the farm grew, back into carbon neutrality was to get some timber into the built environment and get some replanting going. So I'd love to hear both of you on that. Thanks.
So there was a question on insetting. So I don't know if generally, Kim, you want to just kick off in terms of maybe your thoughts on insetting.
Yeah, well, it's not my team, but we have a team within the Carbon Bank that's working on insetting in the various forms of decarbonisation of supply chains, also looking at carbon intensity in the supply chains. I think it's super important to do those alongside each other. And one of the things is that having a tradable commodity like a carbon credit actually allows pricing, right? A farmer can, at least in theory, get a fair price for the services, namely the carbon services he or she provides. So we see that we're farmer first in this case, so we're really interested in that resilience building of additional revenue streams. So any insetting program should reward the farmer fairly, and that's, until now, we've realized still kind of a struggle to get the value chain companies pay for those reductions. So if we can combine that, I really strongly believe in it.
I'll just add to what Kim was saying, because we have worked on insetting projects with food and beverage companies, and specifically, for example, in the coffee sector. And I think in Europe in particular, we have SBTi flag, where a number of companies have set targets for their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Many have realized that the bulk of their emissions are at the farm gate, and are hence trying to work with the farmers to see how they can implement things like, planting more trees on their plantation and all the regenerative agriculture practices that Kim mentioned previously. So you're totally right. In terms of insetting or offsetting, from our perspective, we do still have very complementary services which we provide to people and companies looking to actually manage their value chain from that perspective. So the one thing that we need to ensure is that insetting has the same stringency and integrity as offsetting, right? Because we don't want that to be another mechanism where, obviously we have the same issues we see in the offsetting markets repeated, but in someone's supply chain with less clarity and transparency.
I agree.
Yeah,
totally.
Great that you agree. Cool. All right. I think this countdown is saying 0. Can we take another question, Haley, or we? Is there any? Okay.
Yes.
Is it working?
I can't hear.
Now?
Yeah.
Better? Anne Arvola from Finfund. Thanks for a very inspiring chatting. My question links to the fact that, yes, you're financing, as Rabobank, private farmers with large-scale assets. And I would assume that you're talking about thousands of hectares. And one buzzword which is coming up here often is the landscape approach. Yes. So to what extent your clients have been able actually to cooperate, to create some kind of a landscape level approach in their activities, and have they been able to demonstrate what comes out of that in terms of other benefits than carbon, social, biodiversity, so forth? Thank you.
Actually, thank you. Great question. The honest answer is, I don't know. But it's actually something I want to look into. It triggers me quite a bit. So some of our clients actually have a landscape level land holdings with upwards of hundreds of thousands of hectares. So there should be something on that. I haven't looked into it myself, but I think it's a really interesting angle to look at. So thanks for the question, but I'll take it as a suggestion to include. Thank you. Yeah. That was it.
All right. Okay, so Haley, we're good to go? All right, great. So thanks everyone for your time, and feel free to reach out to myself, Jon at Geotree, Kim at Rabobank, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks.